Behind the polished palace doors, Queen Camilla was reportedly left with nothing but silence, because Queen Elizabeth II may have made one of her sharpest moves long before anyone saw it coming. What looked like a simple royal title for Prince Edward is now being described as something far more serious, a quiet legal shield built into the very bones of the monarchy. And while King Charles III was facing serious health concerns, one lawyer's letter allegedly exposed an anti-invalidation clause that gave Edward the power to push back against Camilla's alleged ambitions. The letter, carrying the seal of Edinburgh solicitors, reportedly landed on the king's desk like a warning shot. Buckingham Palace suddenly had to face a brutal truth. A royal title is not just decoration, not just velvet, ceremony, and fancy wording. In the wrong hands, or maybe the right hands, it can become a weapon wrapped in tradition. For years, many inside the palace looked past Prince Edward, treating him as the quiet brother in a family full of noise. But that quiet image may have been exactly why Queen Elizabeth trusted him most. According to this dramatic royal theory, Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip had built a hidden legal fortress around their youngest son, one designed to protect the crown's private legacy from future power plays. The roots of the story allegedly go back to November 19, 1947, when King George VI issued letters patent creating the Dukedom of Edinburgh for Philip Mountbatten. At first glance, it looked like a grand honour for the man marrying the future queen, but the fine print was where the real game was hiding. Most royal titles look powerful, but carry very little bite. They bring prestige, rank, and history, but not much real control. The Edinburgh title, however, was allegedly different. The document reportedly contained reversionary interests, vesting protections, and legal language that did not simply vanish when one holder died. In plain, street-smart language, the title came with strings attached, and those strings were tied tight. They could sleep in the archives for decades, waiting for the right successor to wake them up. When Prince Philip died in 2021, many inside the palace reportedly assumed those powers had gone with him. They treated the title like an empty chair waiting to be filled, not a legal device still humming in the background. But law does not cry, and law does not forget. The 1947 letters patent allegedly remained alive in the records, carrying instructions only a chosen successor could trigger. Then came June 2022, during the Platinum Jubilee, when Queen Elizabeth made what the public saw as a loving mother's gesture. She conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh on Prince Edward. That word, conferred, is where the drama gets spicy. The palace did not simply say the title was granted like a brand new gift. To grant is to create something fresh. To confer can mean passing forward something already existing, along with its old duties, conditions, and hidden power. By choosing Edward, the son who had stayed loyal, low-key, and mostly scandal-free for decades, the Queen may have handed him more than status. She may have handed him the keys to a locked legal vault. So why keep it so quiet? Because Queen Elizabeth knew palace politics better than anyone. She had watched Camilla's rise, watched her influence over Charles grow, and understood how quickly private estates like Sandringham and Balmoral could become part of a wider restructuring plan. These assets were not just pretty houses and old land, they were family legacy, emotional power, and serious money. The Queen allegedly feared that after her death, the younger branches of the Windsor family could be pushed aside if one central circle gained too much control. That is where Edward allegedly became the failsafe. By attaching management rights and anti-invalidation protections to the Edinburgh title, the Queen placed him in a role similar to Princess Anne's reported internal power. He could activate royal bylaws, question certain decisions, and potentially freeze moves involving private property if those moves were seen as harmful to the hereditary line. In other words, Edward was not just standing in the corner anymore, he was holding a hidden key. By late 2023, King Charles III was reportedly moving fast to consolidate parts of the royal portfolio. His court was reviewing income streams, private estate arrangements, and long-standing administrative structures. Supporters saw it as efficiency. Critics saw it as a power grab dressed up as modernization. And then, right in the middle of the palace machinery, The letter arrived. It was not a warm note from one brother to another. It was a formal legal warning from counsel representing the Duke of Edinburgh. The message was reportedly cold, exact, and impossible to brush away. It claimed that recent estate management decisions had crossed lines protected by the 1947 provisions now allegedly held by Edward. The palace went quiet, not with respect, but with that dangerous kind of silence that fills a room when everyone realizes the floor has been wired wrong. Charles, already under pressure and facing a painful public health battle, was now staring at a legal challenge he could not dismiss with a royal command. He could not simply tell Edward to stand down, because Edward was allegedly not acting out of ego. He was acting under a secret structure left behind by their mother, and that is where the royal drama splits the room. One side sees Edward as the protector, the man who waited 30 years in the shadows, taking the weak and forgettable labels from the press so he could become the grey man nobody feared until it was too late. In that version, Edward is not grabbing power, he is guarding the monarchy from itself. But critics are asking louder questions. Why now? Why force a legal showdown when the king was physically vulnerable? They argue Edward may be using the late Queen's authority to protect his own branch of the family before Camilla's influence pushes them to the edge of the Windsor map. That suspicion is what makes the story so explosive. It is not just about law, it is about timing, loyalty, fear, and who gets protected when the crown changes hands. To understand why this title matters, look at its history. The Dukedom of Edinburgh has never been a throwaway honour. From earlier royal holders to Prince Philip himself, it has been linked to duty, stability, and the hard work of holding the throne's foundation steady. Edward's path to the title was not guaranteed either. Reports once suggested Charles was not eager to pass it on, but the late Queen's intervention changed the mood completely. She saw Edward as the steady hand, the son who had made mistakes but did not build his life on public chaos. That may be why she trusted him with the 1947 mandate. Edward had married Sophie Rhys-Jones, carried out years of low flash duties, and avoided the kind of headline storms that swallowed other members of the family. He was not flashy, and that was the point. The Queen may have believed that the quiet son was the only one who would not use the title for vanity. Through this alleged legal move, she remained present in the room even after her death, not with emotion, but with paperwork. While the public watched the Platinum Jubilee pageantry in 2022, another kind of royal calculation was allegedly happening behind the velvet curtains. Queen Elizabeth II was not just celebrating 70 years on the throne, she was fortifying the future against a danger she believed could come from inside the family itself. The so-called Camilla factor was not framed as personal hatred, but as institutional caution. As Camilla moved from Duchess of Cornwall to Queen Consort, her access to the king's ear became stronger, and that made some old guard loyalists nervous. The fear, according to this version, was that a slimmed-down monarchy could become more than an efficiency plan. It could become a way to pull private wealth, estate control, and family influence closer to Charles and Camilla, while Edward and Anne's branches were left with less room to breathe. To stop that from happening, the Queen allegedly reached back into the 1947 letters patent and used Edward's Edinburgh title as the perfect lock on the door. The most dramatic part is the anti-invalidation clause. In simple terms, it allegedly means a sitting monarch cannot simply erase certain rights by personal preference. A letters patent is not casual palace policy, it is a sovereign legal act, and that makes it harder to wave away. So if Edward's lawyers truly produced those documents, they were not just making noise. They were saying this is bigger than family pressure, bigger than palace mood, and bigger than what Camilla may want. That is why Prince Edward is no longer being painted as the forgotten prince. In this telling, he is the guardian of the fine print, the quiet brother who waited until the archive door opened and then stepped forward with the one clause nobody wanted to face. Queen Elizabeth may be gone, but the specific rights allegedly attached to the Duke of Edinburgh regarding the private estates were made non-dissolvable, and that means her final protection may still be standing in Edward's hands. By the time King Charles began his efficiency drive in 2023, he reportedly believed the power in his hands was final. He moved like a monarch who thought no one inside the family could legally block him. But what he may not have understood was that by allowing Prince Edward to receive the Duke of Edinburgh title, he had allegedly handed his younger brother a hidden veto over the very assets Charles was trying to reorganize. This was Queen Elizabeth's quiet chess move from beyond the grave. The late Queen knew Charles would feel pressure to honor Prince Philip's wishes and recognize Edward with the title. And according to this explosive version of events, she used that exact sense of duty to place the king inside a legal cage he did not see coming. Once Edward's legal team challenged the king's handling of the Scottish estates, the palace atmosphere reportedly changed overnight. The tension was not polite, it was icy, sharp, and personal. Inside the so-called Camilla circle, Edward's move was reportedly seen as betrayal. They believed he had struck at a painful moment, when Charles was already dealing with cancer treatments and the weight of the crown. To them, Edward was using old royal paperwork like a weapon, dragging ancient legal language into the modern monarchy to protect his own financial standing. But loyalists saw something very different. They believed Edward was not attacking his brother at all. He was defending the crown from being pulled too far off course. That is what made the crisis so dangerous. This was no longer just about land, income, or who controlled Balmoral's revenues. It became a fight over the soul of the Windsor legacy. Was Edward the quiet grey man taking advantage of a weakened king? Or was he the last guardian of the fine print, standing between the royal estates and a Camilla-influenced restructuring that could change the family forever? As the legal battle intensified behind the soundproof walls of Buckingham Palace, the real purpose of the Edinburgh Mandate allegedly began to surface. The 1947 letters patent were not just about a title printed on stationery. They were about custody of the Windsor bloodline itself. Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip understood something Charles may have overlooked in his rush toward a slimmed-down monarchy. Private property is the only real independence a royal can hold. Without Sandringham, Balmoral, and the family's ancestral income streams, the monarch's children risk becoming little more than guests inside their own history. That was reportedly the heart of Queen Elizabeth's secret order to Edward. She wanted those lands to remain a shield for the family, protected from outside pressure, administrative reshuffling, and the influence of people who did not share the Windsor bloodline. The concern, according to palace whispers, was not simply about modernization. It was about whether Camilla's advisors and interests could redirect wealth away from Edward, Anne, and the wider hereditary line. The 1947 documents allegedly contained a rare mechanism described as an irrevocable covenant of management. Prince Philip, known for his discipline and military precision, reportedly pushed for protections that allowed the Duke of Edinburgh to act as a co-trustee over certain private income streams. The power did not belong to Edward as just a person. It belonged to the dukedom itself. So when Queen Elizabeth conferred the title on Edward in 2022, he allegedly inherited legal standing that could freeze or veto changes that harmed the hereditary line. That was the hidden power move. Just as Princess Anne has long been seen as a fierce protector of royal traditions, stables, and agricultural interests, Edward allegedly became the financial sentry of the family. When King Charles, possibly influenced by Camilla's wish to consolidate assets for a new royal era, moved to streamline Balmoral revenues in 2023, he reportedly hit a legal brick wall. Edward's lawyers produced the 1947 mandate and argued that the king did not have authority to dissolve those protections. In plain words, the Queen had built a fail-safe into the law. Charles could wear the crown, lead the institution, and speak for the monarchy. But Edward had allegedly been given the power to guard the family's private gold. That is why the choice of Edward was so important. To hold that kind of veto requires someone with discipline, patience, and almost no public ego. The Dukedom of Edinburgh has historically belonged to men of steel, from Prince Alfred to Prince Philip, men expected to support the centre, not steal the spotlight. Edward had spent 30 years proving he could do exactly that. While Charles and Andrew were surrounded by public storms, Edward stayed in the quiet zone. He accepted the press calling him weak, forgettable, or irrelevant, but he kept showing up. He worked without constant headlines. He stayed loyal without demanding applause. And that may be why Queen Elizabeth trusted him with a legal weapon others might have used for vanity or revenge. When the formal legal letter arrived at the palace, it reportedly triggered an immediate information blackout. King Charles, already managing his diagnosis and the pressure of rule, found himself trapped in a brutal paradox. If he fought Edward publicly, he would expose that the late Queen had placed limits on his private authority. If he surrendered privately, he would confirm that Camilla's influence over the estates had been checked. Either path carried humiliation. This created the central tension of the new reign. Supporters saw Edward as a son fulfilling a sacred vow to his mother, protecting the family's core from careless reshaping. Critics saw a man using his brother's illness as a tactical opening to claim financial control. But the 1947 letters patent did not care about opinions, gossip, or palace emotion. Ink does not tremble. The absent Queen's power allegedly remained alive on the page, still shaping the private survival of the Windsors. By the late months of 2023, as winter settled over Windsor Castle, the monarchy reportedly felt a tremor that did not come from protest, scandal, or politics. It came from stained pages written decades earlier. When Charles received the legal dispatch from Edward's council, the mood inside the firm shifted from mourning a matriarch to preparing for a courtroom fight. The king was staring at a legal ghost, one created by his own grandfather and quietly preserved by his mother. For years, many royal watchers assumed titles were mostly symbolic. They carried rank, history, and ceremony, but not the power to limit the monarch's will. But the 1947 letters patent allegedly revealed something far more serious. They positioned the Duke of Edinburgh as a perpetual guardian of the private estates of the Windsor bloodline. Unlike the Crown estate, which is managed separately from the monarch's personal control, Sandringham and Balmoral remain tied to family property, family identity, and family survival. Under the alleged 1947 mandate, the Duke of Edinburgh held a reversionary interest and negative covenant. In simple terms, while the king may own or manage the land, he could not make major structural changes, sell-offs, or income redirections without Edward's consent. That one clause turned the entire power balance upside down. The king had the throne, but Edward had the lock on the vault. The most uncomfortable part of the drama was the Camilla question. Sources close to the alleged legal review suggested Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip had grown deeply cautious about Charles's modernization plans. They feared that a slimmed-down monarchy could turn into a tighter king's purse, pulling wealth and control closer to Charles and Camilla while weakening the independence of Edward and Anne. Elizabeth could not stop Charles from becoming king, and she could not stop him from listening to his consort, but she could legalize a check on his power. That check allegedly came alive at the Platinum Jubilee in June 2022. By conferring the Edinburgh title on Edward, Queen Elizabeth switched on the 1947 protections. Charles, bound by tradition and loyalty to his father's memory, would have found it almost impossible to deny Edward that honour. But by allowing the title to pass, he may have unknowingly accepted limits on his own control over the family's private wealth. Then came the anti-invalidation clause, the most explosive detail of all. This provision allegedly meant that even a sovereign command from the king could not erase the Duke of Edinburgh's rights. The only way to remove them would be through Parliament, a move so risky it could expose private royal finances and trigger a constitutional nightmare. That is the secret power Edward now carries. Like Princess Anne guarding tradition with an iron backbone, Edward has become the financial sentry of the Windsor line. When he sent that legal letter in late 2023, he was not begging his brother for mercy. He was notifying the king that recent attempts to reorganize Balmoral income streams were allegedly void under the 1947 mandate. And the reason Queen Elizabeth chose Edward now looks painfully clear. He had the patience, the discretion, and the quiet strength to hold power without turning it into a public coup. Edward was the man who showed up when the cameras were not watching. He endured years of being treated as the weak link, only to emerge as the one allegedly trained to be the final failsafe. His worth was never in noise, it was in restraint. And when the institution faced what loyalists saw as a Camilla-influenced deviation, Edward waited for the exact moment to pull the 1947 trigger. Once whispers of the legal clash started slipping through palace back channels, the whole royal debate blew wide open. To Edward's supporters, he was not a traitor, not a schemer, and not some forgotten prince suddenly chasing power. He was the ultimate loyalist, the quiet son protecting Queen Elizabeth's final wishes and making sure the Windsor family stayed a family, not just some polished corporate machine run by Charles and Camilla. But the timing was rough, and nobody could ignore that. Sending a legal challenge while your brother is battling cancer, and while the Princess of Wales was also recovering from her own health struggles, looked brutal to critics. To them, this was not loyalty. This was a tactical ambush, a sharp move made before the rules of the game changed forever. They argued Edward was securing his place, his branch, and his share of the royal pie before Camilla's circle could close the door. When Buckingham Palace went quiet after receiving the letter, it was not the calm silence of confidence. It was the silence of a trapped institution. Charles, a king raised to respect duty, history, and royal procedure, allegedly realized that his mother had outplayed him even after her death. The power of the absent queen was now speaking through Edward's lawyers, and the 1947 letters patent were no longer some dusty archive relic. They had become the active law of the House of Windsor. Prince Edward, once dismissed as the forgotten son, had suddenly become one of the most powerful sentinels in the United Kingdom. He did not need to run to the press. He did not need to give interviews or drop dramatic hints. All he needed was the document. The battle for the royal estates had begun, and for the first time in his life, the quiet prince was the one holding all the cards. When the legal letter from Edward's representatives arrived at Buckingham Palace in late 2023, the reaction was not simple family irritation. It was institutional alarm. For the first time in the modern royal era, a sitting king had allegedly been legally checked by his own sibling using a document created in the previous century. King Charles III did not simply wave the claim away. Instead, the palace reportedly called in outside legal counsel, specialists in constitutional property law and ancient peerage rights, to urgently review the 1947 letters patent. That move said everything. The king's internal legal team, used to handling the daily machinery of the crown, had allegedly missed the tripwire Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip had left behind. The dispute centred on Sandringham and Balmoral, two private estates tied deeply to Windsor identity, family memory, and royal independence. Charles's slimmed-down monarchy plan, often linked by critics to Queen Camilla's strategic influence, aimed to centralise income from those estates into one administrative pool. On paper, it sounded like efficiency, but Edward's lawyers reportedly saw something else: consolidation of power. They argued that moving those income streams into one royal structure violated mandatory distribution clauses inside the 1947 mandate. Those clauses were allegedly designed to stop any consort, advisor, or outside interest from redirecting private family wealth away from the direct bloodline. By invoking those rights, Edward did not just ask for a bigger allowance, he asserted a legal right of consent. That was the anti-invalidation power in full effect. Every major decision Charles made regarding the private estates could now require the Duke of Edinburgh's signature. The king's illness did not pause the law. That is what made the timing so explosive. Supporters of Edward argued he had no choice, because if Charles finalised the consolidation, the 1947 protections might have been weakened by precedent. In their eyes, Edward was acting as the sovereign sentry, fulfilling a secret order from Queen Elizabeth to protect the family's survival, no matter how painful the timing looked. Critics inside the Camilla circle saw it very differently. They viewed Edward's move as cold, calculated, and deeply personal. To them, he was using Charles's divided attention to carve out his own financial fortress. They pointed to Edward's 30 years of quiet loyalty and asked whether it had really been loyalty at all, or a long game designed to earn the Queen's ultimate trust and gain access to the vault. To understand Edward's new role, you have to look at Princess Anne. For years, Anne has operated like an untouchable force within the family, guarding the agricultural and equestrian traditions with serious independence. She is the iron shield of the Windsor legacy. Queen Elizabeth's alleged masterstroke was giving Edward a matching domain. While Anne guards the land, the stables, and the old traditions, Edward now guards the legal and financial fine print. The 1947 letters patent turned a quiet man into a constitutional sentinel. By the time the King's external counsel finished their review, the alleged verdict was clear. The provisions were active, enforceable, and dangerous to challenge in public. Charles could not override Edward's veto without risking a legal battle that would tear open the private workings of the royal family. The documents had spoken, and the King was forced to go very, very quiet. As the legal dust settled in early 2024, Buckingham Palace remained silent. But this was no longer confusion. It was the silence of acceptance. The 1947 letters patent were not just historical artifacts. They were active constitutional anchors. King Charles III, already carrying the pressure of the crown and his health, allegedly had to accept a reality he had not imagined at his coronation. The administrative streamlining of the private estates had hit an immovable object. That object was the Edinburgh veto. And Prince Edward did not celebrate. True to the character he had carried for more than 30 years, there were no victory laps in the press, no loud briefings, no public claims that he had humbled his brother. He simply returned to duty, but now with a new invisible weight behind him. By activating the anti-invalidation clauses and the mandatory distribution provisions of the 1947 mandate, Edward allegedly made sure Sandringham and Balmoral stayed protected sanctuaries for the Windsor bloodline. This was the fulfillment of his role as the quiet guardian. Like Princess Anne, who protects the physical and traditional borders of the family legacy, Edward emerged as the defender of the paperwork no one wanted to read until it was too late. His 30 years of invisibility no longer looked like weakness. It looked like preparation. It looked like patience. It looked like a man trained to wait until the exact second the crown needed him. That is why Queen Elizabeth may have trusted him with the 1947 secret. Edward was the one person who could hold a legal weapon and use it as a shield, not a sword. The debate over his timing will probably follow him for the rest of royal history. Supporters will say he saved the family from corporate-style consolidation that could have pushed younger royals aside. Critics will say he used a moment of extreme weakness to secure a financial principality Charles would never have granted freely. But the bigger picture points back to Queen Elizabeth's design. She did not leave behind a dramatic confession. She left behind a legal instrument. She knew that by the time the 1947 provisions were needed, she would no longer be there to argue, plead, or command. The only thing strong enough to stand against the Camilla factor, Charles's impulses, or any future palace reshuffle, was the cold, hard law written into the letters patent. In the end, this story is about the power of an absent monarch who understood one brutal truth better than anyone. People change, loyalties shift, health fails, advisors whisper, and families fracture, but documents remain. Queen Elizabeth saw the possible rise of Camilla's influence, the vulnerability of her son, and the cracks that could form inside her house. By conferring the Edinburgh title on Edward in 2022, she reached forward in time to protect the past. The King's silence after receiving the legal letter may have been the ultimate acknowledgement of his mother's superior strategy. Charles was not just facing a brother, he was facing the combined will of Philip and Elizabeth locked inside a 75-year-old document. The quiet prince is now the sentinel of the Windsor vault, and for now, the legacy of the British royal family remains legally safe behind the fine print. If you want more royal drama, hidden power moves, and palace secrets like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.